Good evening to all of you. It's a true pleasure to be here this night and to welcome all of you to this wonderful roundtable about the main challenges and opportunities the retail world after the pandemic we have clearly all experienced in the last 2 years. We have a wonderful speakers this night, and it's going to be surely a super insightful moment of discussion. But before introducing our wonderful guest, I would really like to start the event of this night, simply thanking once more Bocconi and the Bocconi alumni community that, as you all know well, is a relationship-based platform that aims at promoting professional and personal networking among all Bocconi alumni, students, faculty, and the entire society. And in particular, our topic, the fashion and luxury topic, is one of the 12 that are populating this wonderful community. And so let me take the chance to really deeply thank the entire Bocconi and the Bocconi alumni community, and especially all the entire team that is managing the fashion and luxury topic. I want to, as this is the first event that we are running after Alexandra Trozin has led the topic for so much time with so many interesting events. Let me take the chance to thank once more Alex for the amazing job, and welcome officially Stefano Elizondo, who is now coordinating the role, as now the role of coordinator of the entire topic with an amazing team. And really, I would love to thank this night the entire team that has really done a huge job to inaugurate a new series of events that are starting in a blended mode, but we hope that very soon we are going to welcome you back on our beautiful campus. For this event, I want to express a special gratitude to Stefano and Chiara Berlendi for allowing us to get in touch with so nice, super interesting guest speakers. And in particular, at this point, it's really time to introduce the real protagonist of this evening. I'm truly grateful to the three guests that are going to animate our roundtable this night. Davide Sesia, who is the president of Prada Japan, and he has spent almost 3 decades, I think, if I'm correct, Davide, in Japan. Correct. So you are really a super expert of the luxury industry in that world. And then let me introduce Luca Locurcio, CEO and president of Zegna North America, and from 2016 to 2020, the CMO of Zegna. And we are really interested. Good morning. Good morning again, and good afternoon also to all the others, depending on the time zone you are connected, because this is one of the beautiful things of the remote events mode, that we can really be connected from all over the world. And finally, let me introduce with pleasure Alessandro Valenti, who is President Europe, Middle East, and North Africa for Louis Vuitton, where he is engaged in since 7 years, but before had chief roles in retail within Paul Ralph Lauren, Armani, Versace. So again, the chance to see so many different brands, thanks to the huge experience of our own guests from different geographic perspectives.
Thank you, Manuela, and good afternoon, everybody.
I really want to express our warmest welcome to all of you and to all the participants that are joining us this night or this morning, depending on where you are located, for this beautiful roundtable. So now I would really love to invite Chiara to introduce the topic we wanted to cover this night. I think it's a super fascinating topic, and then we want to warm up our discussion. I just want to anticipate to all our participants that we would really like to make this event as interactive as possible. We know that usually the web is not a facilitator in this respect, but we try to do our best to collect also some questions and to try to really have a Q&A session at the end. So if you are coming up with some ideas that you want to further explore during the speech of our guest, take a note, and we will be pleased to take your questions at the end of the event. Once more, thank you so much to all of you. Chiara, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Emanuela. Thank you. And so it's lovely to be here again all together, gathered for indeed our first event as the fashion and luxury topic. Just very quickly, I'm going to take 2 minutes to remind everyone here that the aim of today is to discuss with our guest how the pandemic has affected, changed, and perhaps permanently transformed the retail distribution channel within the fashion high-end sector. So we think it's important to note and to remember to the benefit of the audience gathered here today listening to our speakers that the severe lockdowns that and hence shop full closures that have followed the spread of the pandemic. And just as a reminder, in 2020, the global personal luxury goods sale has decreased by 23%. So this shop full closure and how the pandemic has spread have actually been put in place along with lockdowns at different moments in time with different rules and hence with different consequences across geographies. As the parterre of speakers gathered here today can testify. So we believe it will be interesting to review together in the first part of the webinar how the situation varied from Tokyo to Paris, to New York, where you gentlemen are talking to us from in real time today. And similarly, in a second moment of our webinar, it will be interesting to see how recovery and rebound, again, just to cite some data concerning the luxury conglomerates that have public information in that respect, Kering for its second quarter announced a plus 11% growth with respect to 2019, whereas LVMH, again for its second quarter of 2021, announced a plus 14% with respect to 2019. So recovery and rebound are still taking place, again, at different speed and with different client behaviors and challenges, again, across and depending on geographies. And this is, as I was saying, something we'll concentrate more in the second part of the webinar. So without further ado, let's deep dive into the conversation. And I will launch the first question, which I am addressing to all of you. And maybe I suggest we start answering it from east to west. So starting from you, Davide. Okay. My question, thank you. The question would be, so based on your experience, what was the immediate impact of the pandemic, and more specifically, what were the critical moments and follow-up actions that were taken during the first weeks of lockdown and shop closures?
Well, first of all, we need to consider that in Japan, the pandemic arrived as quite a tough impact on the society, quite later than it was in Europe or in the United States. This was not due to the fact that the virus actually arrived in Japan later, but this was due because one of the most important characteristics of the Japanese society, which is known as high contest society. The difference between a high contest society and a low contest society, which is typical of the Western society, is that in the high contest society, before the society as a whole moves, everybody needs to be aware about some phenomenon. And in particular, this works for phenomena that are coming from the outside the country. It is typical of crisis or recovery. When the worldwide economy is on crisis, usually Japan will enter in crisis much later than all the other developed countries. And also the contrary is true for what concerns the recovery process. When worldwide basis, we are in a recovery process, Japan may be still in a crisis one. So the pandemic arrived in Japan later, between February and March, if not the second part of March of 2020, when everybody was concerned about it. the infections of the pandemic were in Japan even before, maybe starting from November of the previous year, but all the society started to react it from March, more or less. The reaction was the typical Japanese reaction to such a kind of phenomenon. So overall trend in closing everything and everybody, but not forcing by law everything and everybody to be closed up. They don't need to force by law to be coercive, because they only need to call for some high respect for the society in order to compel everybody to behave in the same way. And this happened actually. Every store was closed from February to the beginning of June. The typical phenomenon that we saw in Europe and United States. It was for Japan, there was another factor that was very important. Until 2019, we had in the luxury market a big percentage devoted to the tourist purchases that for all the luxury market in average counted for about 17 to 20% in value of the market. Of course, starting from February 2020, that market collapsed to zero. And it caused issues for department stores that were investing a lot in the purchasing by the tourists, in particular by the Chinese. For the second part of 2020, the situation actually recovered a little bit across the summer because they opened a little bit the so-called Japanese lockdown. That is not, again, a coercive lockdown, was an invitation to behave in a certain way. And we saw a comeback, a rebound of the domestic market. But again, at the end of 2020, in particular from September to November and December, again, the infection level increased and the story was exactly back as from March to June. So the normal fact in the society and in the economy that we experienced in the Western economics, but with some different characteristics. So a late take into consideration about a phenomenon that was not coming from the inside the Japanese society or the Japanese economy, but came from the outside, and a reaction that was a typical reaction in the average of worldwide.
Thank you, Davide. And maybe I'm gonna pass the baton to Alessandro to discuss how. Thank you.
Being in the middle, I will not repeat actually what happened in Europe can be summarized for me in a word, which is surprise. I think that over the past many decades, Europe had never faced such a challenge as the pandemic, and everybody in Europe underestimated the impact of the pandemic, and that was the result of different paces in different countries, in the way each country had reacted and had tackled the issue. But for sure, something which was impactful for our industry was that no one expected this to last that long. So with in hindsight, what we see today is that 18 months or more since the beginning of the crisis, which was for Europe, February, no one would have expected such a long-lasting impact on the industry. So the immediate impact of the pandemic was that everyone was unprepared. Everyone was not understanding the way out of this. And it was a shock for the people operating. It was a shock for the management. So clearly, from that point of view, the impact was not just only on closing down the stores, but was on reorganizing the whole business model And as we will discuss, probably he had an impact, enormous impact, not only on the retail distribution, but on manufacturing and the supply chain. So the one thing that we were all concerned was closing the stores, but in reality, we soon realized that being in that long lockdown, we would have been suffering for production. So production became one of the main concerns, because while we were finding way out on the distribution with the omni-channel and we were identifying new avenues for the retail, we realized that we had to protect production and we had to continue to supply no matter what the channel was. And the pace was different in Europe. For the people that lived in Europe, realized that it was a long wave that started from Italy and it went all the way up to the Nordics. I think I had the last store closing in May, when the pandemic starts spreading in February. So you might understand, like Davide was saying, there was a delay, there was a gap, and that gap didn't really help, because once we were going out of the crisis in some countries, we were diving deep in the crisis in Eastern Europe. So different dynamics, which really made the things even worse.
Thank you, Alessandro. And I will move to Luca.
Yeah, good morning again to everybody. I think in US, to me, how I would describe it, it looks like honestly 10 years ago, even if it was just the beginning of 2020. I think the reaction here was slightly different. First, I would say that the pandemic was underestimated. So it arrives here a little bit later than Europe and definitely later than Asia, but still people didn't learn from what they have seen abroad. They could have had much more time to be prepared. While when the pandemic arrived, the situation here was completely unprepared. They thought for a while, the US government thought for a while that was just an Asian thing, and then they started to think that was an Asian plus European thing. And when they realized it was a global pandemic and that was an issue also for US, was a kind of too late. So the underestimation to me is the first word. The second word for US is the US market did not react in the same way across the board. US is a different market where every single state have a lot of freedom and a lot of ownership on defining their own rules. And at the beginning, but I would say also during the entire pandemic, the reaction in the United States was and is quite different across the board. If you look at what happens now in Texas or in Florida, it's completely different from what is happening in California or in East Coast. Basically, in Texas, the pandemic, it seems like in Texas, the pandemic did not arrive, even if it arrived, and it was very severe, but the reaction was kind of zero. And this is, I mean, again, positive and negative. From a business standpoint, Texas probably has had the best year in 2020, 2021 since decades, because the business never stopped. They still have a lot of cases now, and they are in trouble because they are one of the lowest vaccinated state in the United States, but people just feel different. I mean, there are states where this is the reaction were different. And California was one of the first state to apply the similar regulation to Europe in terms of social distancing, in terms of mask, etc. There are places like Florida where this regulation never arrived. So I think underestimation is the first word. Differentiation in the reaction is the second. And the third, I would say, is panic. I mean, when the pandemic arrived, the initial reaction was panic. They did not, nobody had a plan. Nobody knew how long this would it last. And the reality is that after 1.5 years, it's clear that the plan and the reaction was an immediate reaction, what was motivated by the panic of the moment, rather than having a long-term vision and a long-term plan. And I think this is is something that probably didn't help in getting out from this situation as fast as possible. But the initial reaction was there.
Thank you, everyone. I'm gonna then let Stefano and Emanuela continue, but I think it was very interesting to hear how it really, again, was different based on each geography, and also how to note that Japan and US being two countries, and with Alessandro having instead a region with different countries, it was still interesting to see how Japan as one country had a more unique way of addressing the situation, whereas Luca, you pointed out how the US have different states, different laws, and how the implementation was within a same country still different and maybe more similar to what Alessandro witnessed in Europe. So thank you. And I'm gonna let Stefano and Emanuela continue.
Okay. Thank you, Chiara. Hi again, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for for sharing what you saw in the immediate moment after the pandemic started. It is really interesting to see, as Chiara was saying, how every country, every region reacted different. But after the first moments of lockdown and after the panic that ensued at the beginning, we started seeing some macro trends. And here we want to start with one of the first things we saw when people were at lockdown without leaving their houses. The appetite for luxury was still there. So we saw a big, acceleration of the existing omnichannel and online trend, where in 2020, the share of luxury bought online increased by 11 points. So here, where we had the biggest jump between one year to the other, it was in Europe. So Alessandro, I would really like to understand how was the transition from a mainly retail and brick and mortar luxury client towards a more online and omnichannel? What was the change in behavior and the biggest surprises for you? Alessandro, you're in mute.
Thank you, Stefano, for the question. And we've been looking at this multiplication of the penetration of e-commerce or e-retails in the overall sales since 2019 to now. And we ended up realizing something quite basic and quite simple. The appetite, as you said, for luxury product was still there, was very strong, but there was something which drove the growth of e-commerce, which was the disposable income at that point, when people felt that no other immediate gratification could be available but shopping. So we saw that immediately after the lockdown, the beginning of lockdown, when the stores were closed, there was no other way of shopping. So clients had only one channel to go to, and they actually took advantage of that channel. We also saw that many companies, not only mine, but many luxury companies, they immediately diversified the offer on the e-commerce because they made the e-commerce a much richer platform. And they also intensified the experience in e-commerce by just not creating a web catalog, but by adding product experience and brand experiences. It was a way to communicate with the clients. It was the best way to remain in touch with the clients. What helped also the e-commerce growth was that the minutes we realized that the stores were closed and the client advisors in the stores had no other way to remain in touch with e-commerce, the first way to continue to serve the clients was to generate transactions through the web. So as you can imagine, many of the tools we adopted at the very beginning were pushing transactions through the web. The initial conversation was with the client advisor. We had a relationship with the clients, but ultimately, most of the conversion was happening in the digital space. And that is something that is remaining with us. So it's one of the elements that will probably remain with us up after the pandemic. When it comes to the experience and the omni-channel experience, there's something that was challenging at that moment that the growth of sales over the web were to meet an unparalleled service on the delivery. As you can imagine, no one had expected such a growth on the e-commerce, and no one, including the leading shipping company or courier companies in the planet, were expecting such a growth of volumes in the service. So what we had to do, and what I think Luca, Davide, and yourself had to do, was to immediately join forces with the major partners to first reinforce the supply, but second, continue to grant an elevated service to our clients. And at the beginning, just to be very upfront with all of you, all the people that are listening, it was quite a difficult exercise because many boxes were going lost, many boxes were going missing, many clients were frustrated with the experience. So, you know, there was a huge operational issue. So what you see in terms of growth of the e-commerce today is the result of a long-lasting exercise from the operational teams at any level, not only at the store, but mostly in the supply and in the head office.
So interesting, Alessandro, thank you so much. And I was truly impressed by your interfunctional perspective. So the idea that all the teams were interconnected and deeply impacted by the pandemic, and the provocation that at the end you had to guarantee to clients the highest, best performing possible experience, even if we were missing the touch point in the physical store. So how to elevate the service, if I remember well, you were saying, even if we are through a kind of a digital screen in between. I was thinking if this kind of transition has also somehow produced a sort of acceleration in the digital transformation of salespeople and, more broadly speaking, the entire back office of the company. I think that if you have a reaction on this, it would be very interesting. And then I would really like also to involve our other guest speakers. And I think also the Japan, who has had such an intense, let's say, focus on conversational commerce. I think the Asian market might be a very interesting perspective on this respect. I don't know if you want to start quickly, Alessandro, to just share your experience on that, and then I would like to also engage Davide and Luca.
For sure, in few words, we had no choice. We had to adapt our tools in the stores. We went from the old clienteling tools that we had to tools that allow the client advisors in the stores to really take advantage of the overall digital experience. So when you talk about acceleration of the digital transformation, certainly it was a way. And in big companies, you know that the needs is very often driving the allocation of investment. So if I have to say, it was a blessing in disguise at that point that the pandemic forced many development to be put in place. And there's something that we don't want to undermine. In a moment of panic, as someone mentioned correctly, Luca mentioned, there is also an opportunity to test and experiment. And so the digital transformation is also the result of the audacity of some people to, at any level, in any company, to really push forward solutions that were probably in the drawers for years, but no one really felt the need to implement. So today we are in a better place thanks to that.
Thank you so much, Alessandro. Davide, what about your experience? This kind of forced somehow education effect in terms of digital transformation of your own salespeople has been a kind of common experience also for you?
Well, the Japanese experience in the e-commerce was very close to what Alessandro just told us, but with some differences related with the typicity of the Japanese society. First of all, Japanese like to go out. It's not a stereotype to say that they live in small houses, but they move a lot inside the cities, even small towns. The pandemic forced to a certain level to increase the e-commerce sales, but not so much as in the other development countries. This is due to this kind of attention to leave the city, to go out, to just stay outside the house or the apartment. There is another characteristic that we need to consider. A part of the disposable income that I agree with Alessandro has been increased during the pandemic, and a lot of people, a lot of consumers try to put the money here and there, and the only way they found was to put it on the website and buying stuff from the e-commerce. A part of that, there is another thing that we need to consider is the fact that in Japan, the e-commerce impact on the overall luxury market generated revenues is not so big as in other major developed countries. And why that? Because the Japanese consumers prefer to have a direct experience with the product, prefer to touch the product, and uses the e-commerce as a tool to have the first approach to the product in order to drive the consumer itself to go to the store and have a direct experience with it. So we experienced an increase of 600% in net terms and net revenues for the e-commerce, but that was not so big as in terms of percentage of the total revenues compared with 2019, as I believe all the other speakers experienced in their market. Obviously, at the store level and at the company level, the attention to the e-commerce channel increased a lot, and everybody, as Alessandro said, tried to find new ways, new kind of services, speed up the process, increase the mix of the products, improve the overall quality of the network. Obviously so, but within the limitation of that the market gave to the e-commerce development.
Thank you so much. Luca, do you want to add a note about the US market?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I totally agree with what Alessandro said about the test and learn approach that I think was one of the best gift that this pandemic gave to us. So the fact that pushed all of us to try new things, and some of them worked, some others didn't work, but for sure we had to experiment a new way of dealing with our customer, a new way to interact together, a new way of working. And I think this was the nice learning from the pandemic. The e-commerce part at the beginning was a mess, to be honest. Operationally, why was very complicated. We faced an incredible amount of volumes that we did not expect. We were not ready for that. Regarding us, for example, we used to have our warehouse where we ship product in Italy. So when we locked down everything in Italy, we locked down also the warehouse. So was for a few weeks, we haven't been able to ship our product also on e-commerce. So operationally was very complicated. But one point that I want to clarify is that the e-commerce and the online business obviously was a good support, and it grew a lot, but was not even close to recover the gap on the retail. Let's be clear on that. So 2020 for the luxury business was a mess, was a minus 20, 25, 30% of the business. And even with e-com doubling its penetration on the total market, this was not even close to recover and to fill the gap of what the stores were losing. So to me, this is telling us how much e-commerce can grow and how much e-commerce can be important, but how much this business is still dependent from the physical touch point. We are talking about penetration that moved probably from high single digit to double digit, depending on category, on country, etc., but reaching maybe 1/5 of the total market. The other 80% of the market is still on the retail side, and these were closed. So I think we talk a lot about e-commerce during this month and during these the last 18 months, which I think is good and is nice, and it brought us in a very different situation from a digital standpoint. Still, when we look at the number of the total sector of luxury in 2020 are strongly negative.
So Luca, it is really interesting what you're mentioning, because it is true. Our business is a mainly brick and mortar physical space, and more importantly, the relationship between the sales associate, client advisor, and the client. So I really agree with what Alessandro was saying in terms of there was a lot of investment, digital transformation, and there was an audacity to do new things. And also connecting that with what David said about that our clients, they want to go into the store, touch the products, connect with the people, is part of the overall experience. So something we saw that digital transformation and the e-shop was a tool, but not the end. And something that we see overall as a trend is that it was about maintaining and increasing the relationship between the brand, that is a personal relationship with the sales associates and the client. And this was made by clienteling. So there was a big push in new trends, new testing, new experimenting a lot in terms of clienteling. Some of them successful, some of them less successful, but overall, this is what covered the gap a little bit more. Can you elaborate about what was your experience in this?
For me or for Alessandro, sorry?
For you, Luca. For everyone,
okay.
We can start with.
Yeah, I'll start. Happy to start. So yes, to me, this is the real game changer of the pandemic, honestly, is the clienteling piece. So the way we have changed the way we work in the store. Yes, we are more digital savvy than 2 years ago. Yes, the penetration of e-commerce is doubled. Yes, we have created an infrastructure in the meantime from a digital standpoint that will last probably forever, and this is great. But to me, the biggest shift that I have seen in this market is honestly in retail more than on e-commerce. So the reality is that now, even after 18 months or 19 months or whatever months we are after the beginning of the pandemic, the outreach piece of the business in the store, so the clienteling piece, it became the most important part of our business. So close to 50% of what we do in the store is not driven by the walk-in customer, so the organic traffic that just comes in store, but is driven by a direct one-to-one relationship with this customer, whether it's happening through a text message or phone call or appointment, whatever you want, but is in a certain way is stimulated. And this creates a completely new way to do business in retail. It did exist even before, was just a smaller portion of our total business, and now is probably the biggest, or is at least as big as the walk-in. And this to me is the biggest shift I personally have seen coming from this pandemic. And the way to react to this is very complicated, because is a mix of different things. It's a mix of culture, system that you have in the store, and people. So the people you hire for your store should have different skill set of the people that you used to hire 3 years ago. Because 3 years ago, you try to maximize the conversion of the traffic that were coming organically because of marketing, because of people walking in Fifth Avenue, because of whatever you want. Now you need someone that is able to truly build an authentic relationship with a customer, having a direct one-to-one connection with him, making sure that he's in contact with him every month or every 6 weeks or whatever. So it's a different way to do business. And this has to be across the board for every single CA, every single sales associate you have in your retail door. Culturally wise is again a big shift, because you cannot wait anymore the business coming in your door, and it changed everything. It changed everything because it changed the way you select your location for opening your store. You change the competencies and the capabilities you are looking for in your people. It changed the system and the IT infrastructure you need in your store. So it to me is really the biggest shift I have seen based on this pandemic.
Can I, Stefano?
Yeah, of course.
I cannot be in more agreement with Luca than on this. Clienteling is really what we will live after finally this pandemic will be over. So a domestic client orientation emphasis on all levels of the store. So human resources, systems, infrastructures, a cultural way to think about the clienteling, a very deep attention to any kind of aspects of the very important customers. This is really what the pandemic teaches us, and this is the only thing, and it's a big thing, that we will be left after it.
Thank you, Davide, and also Luca. Amazing summary of what the clienteling is representing for all of us. I mean, no more to add. Just little things that we undermine in the past is clienteling means understanding, getting to know our clients. If there is something that we all, and I know that you all are doing at any level, and especially in the US and in Japan, actually, I see my colleagues, is getting to use the information we have about our clients in a more constructive way. We used to build KPIs around clients. Now we used to get information that are relevant to create what you mentioned, Luca, this authentic relationship. I was reading an article a few days ago, and I was quite touched by the article saying the brands are now becoming and pretending to be best friends with the client. It's something that it's true. Somehow, clienteling means pretending that we'll be their best friends. And what I always remind the team is that, as you said, Luca, it's about authentic relationship, because not only it helps our clients, but it also helps our client advisors. We tend to talk about what how the pandemic affected the clients, and we tend to forget that our client advisors were on the verge of a depression and nervous breakdown when they were home doing their work on the phones. And so today there is an opportunity that they might appreciate more, and they appreciate more the importance of having a human relationship with the clients. So the authenticity is, for me, is a key word. I'm glad that you mentioned, I'm glad that, Davide, you insisted on that. If you want luxury to remain authentic, well, a relationship should be authentic.
Thank you so much. So many interesting insights, and I will have many questions I would like to address you. Let me start at least from 2 points you have touched. One is to do with the importance of the authentic relationship, the role of building a relationship between a specific sales assistant and a specific client. In this respect, we have often talked about also the possibility to hybridize e-commerce and social media. I think that especially the Asian market has a kind of tradition on that. We talk about the so-called conversational commerce. So Davide, I would especially like to ask you what has been your experience in this respect, and to what extent we have really discovered a kind of new area of intersection between social and e-commerce opportunities. And then later I would like to follow up on the last point raised, Alessandro, about the increasing data that we have at our disposal, and I would really like to get back to this point with all of you. But before, Davide, do you want to give us an insight about the role of conversational commerce, which I think in Asian markets has been pretty relevant, right?
Correct. It is relevant much more in the Chinese markets in Asia than in Japan, because it's an astonishing thing when I consider the fact that Japan is not so much developed in digital, not in digital technology, but in digital utilization. Than the Chinese market, in particular the mainland China. But also in Japan, the conversational commerce is a phenomenon that actually started during the pandemic, because everybody was forced to find out a new way to communicate with the customer. Japanese retail system has a very long history of a very strong communication with customer, but all the communications that they established in the past were one-to-one communication, in-store communication. Now they learned that the digital tool can help in contacting the customer, but cannot help in maintaining the relation with it. Contacting and maintaining are two different things. In Japan, they prefer to contact the customer in order to maintain a vis-a-vis relation with her or him. And this is the real one of the most valuable in terms of clienteling characteristic of the Japanese market. A lot of things are going on the web, in the digital, on the conversational level, in the e-commerce. But at the end of the day, everybody here is targeting to have a vis-a-vis contact with the customer. Even during the pandemic, when all the stores in Japan were locked down, a lot of brands, including Prada, we asked to the customer to come to the store. We welcomed the customer to the store one by one, and that was a very good tool in order to keep the direct contact and the relation with them alive. So digital is important for this market, but is not essential.
Thank you very much, Davide. I think that all of these insights are really pushing me to explore a further direction that was already partially touched by Alessandro, related to the role of granular information that we are collecting thanks to the increasing interaction we are experiencing in a digital setting. So first of all, it's clear that digital transformation has brought a new traffic into the online world. And so it's kind of natural question to me to ask you, what are you doing to maintain this new traffic online in an omnichannel environment, but which kind of initiatives are you trying to put in place in order not to lose these new people that you have had the chance to get in touch with? And through this systematic interaction, we have also benefited, I think, from an amount of information, granular knowledge about consumers, probably with no precedent, no similar, let's say, amount in the past. And this is also a question that is very coherent with the first question we get by Daniel into our chat, who is talking about the role of big data in designing a new approach to clienteling and making authenticity something that can really experience human touch in a different way. So what are you doing to really take advantage of this new huge potential gold mine? But if we do not take, let's say, meaningful pattern out of this gold mine is really going to remain just potential. So I would really like to get from you the perspective on that. Luca.
Yeah, I mean, if there is one thing that the pandemic, I mean, we knew before the pandemic that data were important, no? We knew because we see every day that who owns the data are typically the most powerful and rich company in the world. So it's Google, it's Facebook, it's Amazon. So we knew that this was important. We discover how much those data are becoming important also for our business and how we can use this data in a different way. And to me, in a different way, meaning basically two things. One is every time you have an element of intermediation between you and the customer is an issue. Whether it's online or offline, it's the same. And the reason why we are, all the luxury brands are moving in the physical world more into the concession model, for example, for wholesale, because they want to own the relationship with the customer. And in a wholesale model, you do not own the relationship with the customer. And the same is online. Every time you rely on someone else, whether it's a platform or a Farfetch or whoever else, you are giving up your direct relationship with the customer to someone else. Obviously, there are some benefits: the traffic, the scale, the amount of business you can generate, but there are some disadvantages. The second point to me is how to use those data. And again, I go back to the previous point of there is one piece which is system and process. In order to manage all of this incredible amount of information in an effective way, you need to have a big infrastructure. Without an IT process, system, and a good process, you cannot do anything. Unfortunately, when you talk about data, the physical infrastructure, the IT infrastructure is the foundation. So the company that did not have this foundation to invest in the last 12 months or 18 months to create this foundation, the company that did have it, they started to use it in a different way. The second point, again, is culture. I go back to the culture point because if we believe that data are important, that clienteling is the way to do business, our KPI must change. So probably the way to evaluate if someone in the store is good or is not only with revenues, not only with conversion, but is how many times he has been able to contact a customer or a new customer. What is the success rate of this outreach activity? So those are KPI that we started to use more and more into our business that were kind of new, or at least not as important as they were in the past. And the third point is again regulation, because when you talk about data, like it or not, you need to follow some strict rules, which are the regulation. And in US specifically, we go back to the previous point that the regulation in California is different from the regulation in New York. So to me, one of the biggest issue was try to create a system that was one to fit all, that fits to all my states and my region within an environment which was different state by state and area by area. Again, United States, the kind of GDPR or privacy regulation of California is totally different from the one in New York. And typically you have one CRM system across the board. So this was a little bit tricky for my market.
Very interesting, Luca, really, thank you so much. I think that you are touching so crucial points, the role of incentives and how we should redesign incentives, the role of regulation, and the mess of having different rules in different countries. Alessandro, do you want to follow up on with your own experience, combining together big data, different incentives and different KPIs for salespeople, different rules of the game in different countries? How are you trying to find a way to make a virtuous cycle out of all of these different pillars?
Well, first of all, Luca, you touched on the importance of information that we had somewhere in the drawers. The size of the information and the data we have now available is obviously 4 or 5 times bigger. And I remember one of the first conversations I had with my team, it was, an information is as good as much you can use it, or it's totally useless. And with the euphoria of the pandemic, we felt that all of those digital interactions were giving us a lot of additional ammunition to create relationship with the clients. And we soon realized that most of the information that we were collecting were in the end useless. So we had to change direction, and we have to go back to the ground, which goes in the direction of what Davide and you have advocated. And we ask our store, what is that at some point might become relevant for them to know, to not lose touch with the clients. So to answer to your question, Emanuela, we have a huge amount of data. We have a huge amount of transactions on the digital. And we know that some of the clients, there are clients that leave their cookies because they want their cookies to be collected. And there are some clients that leave their cookies, but they don't want their cookies to be used or to be taken advantage. So the first things we have to do is to understand what is that brings to a second connection of relationship or phone calls with the clients, even if they've been shopping on the web. And what is that has to remain in the web. We experiment, we realize that there is a large percentages of clients that doesn't necessarily like to be studied from the companies. And it's for GDPR rules, for the regulation, but it's also because they like to remain anonymous on the web, because that's one of the advantage of the web. And there is also a percentage of clients that would love to be considered and recognized by the brand as being a valuable client. In those cases, to Luca's point, once you manage to filter the vast amount of data and go down to those clients, the value of building a relationship with them is huge. So the CRM today is still something we are exploring, and we know the old CRM, which was about one size fit them all, sending an information across the board and see the reaction. So tomorrow, I believe the CRM will be very surgical, very specific. We need to talk to people with a bespoke message. And this is something that we are learning, we're all learning to do. We're not there yet. I don't think we are there. We still have a long way before. So it's something we started with the pandemic and which will continue in the future. It's the same principle we apply sometimes to the Google spend when we buy on the SEM. We know how much we spend. We don't know how much it comes back, just because we don't know, unfortunately, if we are talking to the people that want to hear from us.
Thank you so much. Super insightful. Stefano, do you want to add a last question before perhaps opening to the chat and the contribution of all our participants?
Yes, I would like, it is really interesting, the insights you have been sharing. And what I take from this is that the pandemic was a big shift, a big shock to our business. How do we do business day to day? And we have discussed, I think we can divide it in two parts. So one is a temporary shock. So it's about a peak in a shop, the lockdowns, the closing of the stores, the stopping of touristic flows that impact mainly Europe and Japan. But we have also mentioned things that structurally change the industry and they can remain for long term. So one is about the clienteling, then about data and how we can use that data to do hyper clusters of clients and go to them with an authentic and relevant contact, and also about talent. So who are we looking for in our stores? Who are we looking for in our offices? So my question for you, and here we can go a little bit wider for the three of you, is what do you think is here to stay? Of all these things that we have developed, we have experimented, that we have gone forward as an industry in the last 18 months, what will stay and what are the key success factors for this?
I'll start. So it's a difficult question. So I think there are different phenomena. Let's start with the one you mentioned. The tourist flow, I think, honestly, will be back. I don't know when, and I don't know how fast, but I expect one day or another, the situation goes away and people will start to travel again. It does not affect my market as much as Europe, because US has always been a very domestic market. But for example, I'm in charge of Canada, and Canada is strongly affected by the Chinese customers that are not coming. So I will expect Chinese coming back to Canada one day or another. I don't think it will happen in 2022, not for sure, not in 2021, probably not in 2022 either, but one day or another they will come back. So I think the tourist flow will be back. One temporary phenomenon that is related to this situation in this market, for example, is that there are some area that were booming because of the pandemic. I give you just an example. I mean, our business in Aspen or in Miami grew dramatically in the last 12 months because all the New Yorkers that had a second house in Aspen or in Hamptons or in Miami, they decided to go there and live there for 1 year. I was there a few months ago and I met people in Aspen that were there for 12 months or for 18 months. So this is a temporary phenomenon. I don't think they will live in Aspen forever. I think they will be back in New York one day or another. How long this would take, I don't know. Is there a small percentage of these guys that now discovered that living in Aspen is fantastic and they can work from there? Yes, I think so, but I think it's marginal. I don't think the majority, I think New York will be back. New York came back after every single issue, every single crisis, every single tragedy that happened in the city. I think New York will be back also after the pandemic. Office remote, another big topic. Will people come back in the office every single day? I think honestly they will. Probably they will stay one day in remote, probably, but I don't see, at least in this market I don't think is ready for moving into a remote way of working, unless we don't talk about 1 day per week, which doesn't affect honestly the business. But on the other side, what I can tell you related to my market is that the casualization is not gonna be back. So people will go back in the office, yes, but won't dress anymore with suit and tie. But this was a phenomenon that started before the pandemic. The pandemic just was an accelerator of a phenomenon that started way before. And I think this is a phenomenon that will never be back. So the formal uniform that people used to have to come in the office, I think won't be back. And this affects particularly my business, since Zegna, as you know, is only a menswear brand. So I think there are some elements that the pandemic just accelerated, other that probably will be back, but not at the same level of the pre-pandemic. And there are other that are here totally to stay. And the penetration of the e-commerce, I think, will never go back. The importance of clienteling will never go back, etc. So I would probably divide the three bucket in this way. Yeah.
Can I, Stefano?
Yes, of course. Thank you.
Temporary shocks or temporary phenomenon in the Japanese market, tourism market, in the middle term, starting from the end of 2022, the Chinese will come back, but at the maximum of half of the level that they reached in the peak of the tourist Chinese market in Japan, so in 2017. And I do not foresee that not even in the longer term they will reach that peak anymore. This is due to the political economy of the Chinese party, the autocratic and the autocracy system that they are establishing there. They want to increase the domestic demand more than to export the consumer's business. all the other nationalities are in Japan a minority comparing with the Chinese, are Koreans and some other Western American or Russian. Office remote. In Japan, the office remote phenomenon has not been, not even during the pandemic, most severe month, a real phenomenon. A lot of foreign companies, American banks or Western banks, financial institutional organization forced their employee to stay at home and do office remote, but that was not very well accepted by the Japanese for the very same attitude that I explained before, their attitude to go out and to leave the city. Even during the pandemic, that was not a lockdown inside the house or the apartment. They went out almost normally. Structural change, a part of the clienteling, much more higher attention on the very important customers, the importance of data, the CRM, the in-store CRM, which will become, at least in this market, one of the most important figure inside the store organization. All the KPIs and all the data we can imagine. A part of this kind of structural change. In Japan, I expect to see some physical structural change. Almost 85% of the distribution in the luxury business, and not only in the luxury business, is done by the department stores. Department store used in the 80s to be everywhere. Then there has been a merger and acquisition process that led to the current level. But structural changes for department store will happen inside the same department store. They will devote a bigger space to each brand, and not anymore some small spaces to almost everybody or all the brands available in the market. A bigger presence because they will want to attract many more customers, also from a visual impact point of view. So what we as a brand are experiencing as clienteling, in the same way the department store will apply to their business. And this will be the most big structural and physical shock in a way, or effect in a way, that the Japanese department store network will experience, and maybe is already experiencing, because they are already planning to do it starting from 2022 with renewal and some revision of the luxury floors.
Maybe just to add, Stefano, to what Davide said, for Europe, clearly the drop on international tourists has been very relevant. 2020 and 2021, we saw a loss of almost 95% of international visitors. But someone said, never let a big crisis to go wasted. And if you are, and we are talking about clienteling, is because the drop in traffic, international visitors, also allowed the people in the stores and the people in the office to focus more on local clients, which was very much needed. And it was very much demanded by the local clients, who were screaming loud the lack of attention of the luxury industry to the locals, because an easy flow of revenues was coming from the international visitors that were visiting the main the main capital cities. So one thing we learned, that necessity made all of the people in our stores to become more savvy when it comes to local people and to develop the clients. It's human nature. We are responding to some needs. And in that case, we taking care of local clients, and hopefully will continue to take care, even though to touch one of your points, I'm afraid that if at some point big flow of tourists will start again, we'll go back to some bad habits. And that's, again, something that we have to manage. In terms of structural changes, one thing that is actually relevant is that people are now realizing how big of the choice is the e-commerce, even if it's still not the majority of the business. It's been growing. They know that it's there, and they tend to buy categories where there is no value added in having a service in the web. So both luxury brands and department stores that are still, a relevant share of the business, especially in France, in the UK, in Germany, will have to adjust the offer, the product offer. Will have to adjust the service to make it more and more relevant for the people to come to a store or to a department stores. So this will impose to every luxury brand to reallocate spaces in the stores, to gain spaces if we want to create different experiences. I've seen over the past months a multiplication of the projects around the food and beverage in the luxury industry. It's a phenomenon that we experienced at first in Japan. Davide, you must know, the first Vuitton cafe and restaurant actually opened in Japan. And we've seen other brands going big and loud on that. Just to say that retail as it was in 2019 will have to change, will have to evolve. The people, as Luca mentioned, the talents we have in the stores, but also the quality of the services and the velocity of the product. Because if we want the people to come to our stores, we need to give a reason, and sometimes drops and capsule will help the stores to remain relevant.
Thank you so much, Alessandro, because you perfectly anticipated the next question we have by Alberto, who was actually asking about the different role that you associate today to physical shop after the development of the digital wave we have all experienced. I don't know if in this respect, Davide and Luca wants to add something about the evolution of the role of the physical store.
The question is very interesting, but honestly, I do not see a dramatic change in the role of the physical store before and after the pandemic. I only see that the store will become, or is already becoming much more a center of attraction for everything. I can give you an example. E-commerce can be delivered from the store directly to the customer and not from the bulk, so from a warehouse. This makes the store at the center of attention. This makes the store or that store much more directly related with the e-commerce customer. A part of this example, I do not see the store that will change dramatically in its role, in its shape or whatever. The store has always been very important, in particular in the Japanese culture, because it's an evolution. The department store is an evolution of the shop street that have been present in the Japanese city and the beginning until the beginning of the 20th century. So it's only a vertical evolution of an horizontal street. Always in this culture, the Japanese gave to the store not only the role of a place where you can buy something, but also a role where the customer can meet somebody, a role where the customer can stay, a role where the customer where can go. And even the department store in Japan that as in Japanese are called the hyakaten, so places where you can find the 100 things, are not only places of destination for shopping, are places of destination to live half of your day during the weekend, for instance. So in this regard, maybe an evolution of the physical store after the pandemic we can experience in the Western side of the globe, but not in Japan, where the role of the physical store is still very strong inside the society.
Thank you so much, Davide. Luca, do you want to add just, I would say, in a nutshell, a comment on this?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Davide. Basically, I don't see big shift in the retail, in the store, in the role of the store. I see an acceleration in trend that were already there. Experiential retail was there before pandemic, is now accelerating because of the pandemic, for sure. Omnichannel was there before the pandemic, yes, was now accelerating because of the pandemic, for sure. So I see just the acceleration of some trends that were already there. I honestly don't see new trend in the store role coming because of the pandemic.
Thank you so much. Let me pick up a further question. In the meanwhile, I just want to remind all our participants, if they have any very last quick questions, feel free to drop in the chat. We'll try to do our best to pick up all the remaining comments. We have now a question by Livius saying, considering the prioritization of the direct-to-consumer strategy that was before indirectly mentioned by Luca, what are the expectations and criteria when partnering with the wholesale platform going ahead? This is a kind of a different angle, I think, pretty interesting to touch.
Yeah, is very interesting. I think this is very different market by market. So I start, I mean, from obviously from my market, and it's very different brand by brand. Yes, the priority is the direct relationship with the customer. The priority is to give to your customer this best expression, the best possible expression of your brand and the best possible experience. Is this possible with wholesale? It depends. Hopefully, yes, depending on the business model, depending on the wholesale, depending on the region. If we talk about this specific market, I think there are very few brands in this market that can really avoid completely the wholesale channel. There are some, but are very few. I think wholesale is still a big part of this market and is still very, very relevant. And by the way, those are customers that are not moving from one channel to another very easily. So there is a very strong trust and very strong loyalty on department store in this market. Then is this gonna stay forever? I don't know, but this is the situation right now. What you can do in this market is try to adjust the business model, moving more and more into a business model that give more ownership to the brand and to use this channel as a distribution point or a distribution center. So concession is a good example of that. When you own the inventory, when you own the buying, when you own the experience, this help you in owning the experience you can give to the customer. So I see in this market more and more moving from a pure wholesale model to a concession. I don't see in this market disappearing the wholesale platform, both online and offline. I'm not making any distinction between the online and offline, or at least not anytime soon. Then in 10 years, we'll see.
Alessandro, Davide, do you want to add your experience?
Well, you know,
please, Alessandro.
So thank you, Davide. Just quickly, because I'm in a one direct channel model business, so it will be difficult for me to say, but I agree with Luca that the world needs, the business world needs, the retailer needs the wholesale, because the wholesales are also offering clients the possibility to enter the brand from a different door, from a more approachable door. So I don't think some brands will ever make it without the wholesales, because they're recruited through the wholesales. As Luca was saying, I'm convinced that there are a lot of wholesalers, not only department stores but specialty stores and the new fashion trendsetters that are making a difference and are also introducing clients to a brand. So I think they will last. They have something to say, and they totally make sense in the business.
Thank you so much, Alessandro. Davide, do you want just to?
Yes. When I spoke about Japanese department store, I mean, in Japan, the department store for the luxury business is almost all directly operated. So it's a different model from the Western Europe or United States, where you have a mix directly operated store on the road and then department store with wholesale. But anyway, I agree with Alessandro and Luca about the role of the wholesale, and in particular the role of recruiting through the wholesale that cannot be avoided by so many brands. In Japan, and not only in Japan, we go 100% directly, so we avoid having a mixed distribution, wholesale and directly operated store. But again, as a theoretical framework, I agree that the wholesale can be used in order to penetrate the market and establish a presence that eventually can or must grow up and become a directly operated presence.
Thank you, Davide. We have one last question from Loredana, and it is about getting closer to our clients. So getting to where they are, it can be secondary, tertiary locations. So the question is, do you see a tendency to make the physical store presence more local, as in opening smaller flagships in minor yet relevant cities? Is this something that maybe Alessandro, if you want to go, seeing that?
Yeah, thank you, Loredana, for the question. And you capture a trend of retail, which is we call it temporary residency or temporary stores, or someone else call them pop-up. We tend to explore in some cities the potential of the market by doing some exciting operations. Just to be clear, we know the markets where we want to have a temporary presence. We know the markets where we want to stay longer, but sometimes we use a temporary presence to understand the reaction of the clients to the brand, and we actually capture the potential of the market. Over the pandemic, and it's mainly due to the travel path and to the limitation of travels, as Davide and the team was mentioning, we had many regional stores growing beyond expectations. So that opened the door to the conversation whether it was worth going into other cities. But the answer is we have to do it very carefully, because those moments of excitement in the regional cities might not last long. So we prefer to test, to see, to excite, to recruit, and then we take a decision. And I think it was back to what Luca was saying earlier, that the Aspen of Europe have grown dramatically. The Deauville, the Forte dei Marmi, the Saint-Tropez, they've grown beyond any reasonable numbers. Do we expect them to stay at that level? Of course not, because most probably people will go back to their path, to their common habits, to their work habits, and they will have to spread their spend in the capital city.
Thank you. Davide and Luca, do you want to give a quick comment about this before closing?
Yes, very quick. For Japan, the answer is no, because starting from the beginning of the 90s to the middle of the 2000s, we experienced the concentration towards the big cities of the department stores with luxury floors. So I do not see, and there is no reason why this pandemic will generate an increase of the stores in the not big cities, as we here call the secondary cities in Japan. I agree with Alessandro about the utilization of pop-ups or temporary stores that can be done even in not the big cities, but with a high risk to generate low revenues.
Can you hear me, guys? Because I had to connect from my phone because I don't know what happened to my laptop.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. No, I think for US is the same. I think the situation is gonna last for a while. I think the B and C cities are super relevant in this moment, and the situation will last. But I think that people will go back to their previous kind of way of. I see the biggest impact on this in the workforce population rather than on the consumer side. I think the consumer will come back in New York, will come back in LA, will come back in Miami. So this is for sure, and these cities are so relevant that we'll be back at the same relevancy that they had in the past. The big question to me in this market is the workforce side. There are people that decided now to leave out of New York and work out of New York, even if this means having a lower salary, having a different quality of life, etc. I think there are a lot in this moment, and I think this is because they experience this different way of living because of the pandemic, and they discovered that this is the way they liked it. And that's why now one of the biggest issue in this market is what we call talent war, because finding people for our hiring people for our store is the game, the name of the game of the next 12 months. And this is not only retail; it's the same in service, in restaurants. There is a war for attracting talent, which this market haven't seen in a while.
Thank you, Luca. So unfortunately, we finished the time. So I would like to thank you so much for your insights, your participation. It was really helpful to the pandemic really changed our business, and it's really helpful to see your output, your outlooks, and to understand where are we going now. So we take some comments. So the keyword I hear is authenticity, clienteling, and talent.
Thank you so much, Stefano, for closing with these core messages. I just want to take the chance to thank so much Alessandro, David, and Luca for their amazing speech and the entire topic for organizing this beautiful roundtable. Thanks a lot to all the participants. Looking forward to meeting our next webinar. Ciao a
Thank
tutti.
you. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks to all the people. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.